People talk about rollercoaster journeys in business, but you won't have heard one as extreme as that of this week's guest, Jacob Hill of Offploy. This is the Leeds Business Podcast, and I'm your host, Phil Fraser. I'm a business sounding board. Think somewhere between a business coach and a business mentor. I help business owners not to be lonely at the top. Jacob tells us all about his startup at the age of 19 that brought him business awards and £300,000 of angel investment, but also talks about the mistakes made that brought it all crashing down. He then shares with us the story of his arrest and subsequent prison sentence that changed his life forever, and the positives that have subsequently come from it. He also explains how you can access a pool of top quality staff with exceptional levels of motivation and loyalty at a fraction of market salaries. To make sure you never miss out on every episode of the Leeds Business Podcast, sign up to our priority list at www.leedsbusinesspodcast.com. Everyone that signs up gets a free gift to help their business. So, let's get into what is a really absorbing and thought-provoking interview. In today's episode of the Leeds Business Podcast, we talk to Jacob Hill, Managing Director of Offploy. Hi, Jacob.
Hi, Phil. Thanks for having me along today.
Now, your story starts all the way back at school or at university. You came up with a brilliant business idea. Tell us about it.
The business idea, I don't think it was so brilliant because I'm not doing it today, but maybe it had its own value and benefit in some other way. I always went camping as a kid with my mum to Italy. I always went to festivals when I was a teenager, and after one soggy festival experience, I thought it'd be really helpful for parents and their kids maybe to have one pack they could buy with everything you need to camp at a festival in one kit for £70. You'd order it online, collect it at the festival, and the extra lazy people could have it set up waiting for them. And I swear, it almost had everything in it, apart from the kitchen sink. It had your tent, sleeping bag, sleeping mat, fine. But we went as far as first aid kits, ponchos, toilet seat covers, and I don't think they were very useful actually, because no one wants to sit on a single ply piece of tissue on festival toilets anyway, so maybe that wasn't a good idea. But the idea was it was everything in one pack for 70 quid, and it was there for the parents just as much as it was for the kids.
Okay, we're on the Leeds Business Podcast. Obviously everybody knows Leeds Fest. I assume that's where the idea sort of started.
It was, yeah, when I was, 18. That was when I had my soggy Leeds Fest experience. And then the idea is that the kit was built around that experience. We ended up sponsoring festivals up and down the UK, but never sponsoring Leeds Fest, unfortunately. But, live and learn. Great organisation, great idea, but maybe poor execution, some might say.
Okay, so you're 19, you've got a brilliant business idea. How does a 19-year-old go about setting up a business?
I was always entrepreneurial. I was selling sweets at school at 15 or 14. I had multiple kids working with me and lockers rented. I did it in 2 or 3 schools in the local area. It got so much. I loved enterprise. I wasn't academic, and enterprise spoke to me. It was something I was able to excel in. So for me, that was my reward system, to build something out of nothing. I couldn't ever digest a book and get a good grade. My parents always thought I could be doing more, but business for me was my passion. So sweets at 15 or so, then music events for my local area, Halifax and Huddersfield. I'd run music concerts, and they were the biggest concerts for our age group, 16 to 18-year-olds. I had 700 to 1,000 kids turn up to these events every 3 weeks or so. It was amazing. It was such good fun. And I learned then to build networks, marketing, organising events and all that stuff. And then obviously I loved concerts, festivals. It all tied together, and ended up going to a festival and saw another opportunity. It felt like a huge jump. I must admit, it felt like a huge jump going from hiring a venue, hiring some bands at 16, 17, 18 to negotiating with Chinese suppliers, dealing with customs and bringing stuff into the UK. But it was a heck of a lot of fun on the journey for sure.
Okay, so it almost felt natural to you just to get into business and do business.
It felt like there was no other choice. I really struggle academically. I can read a book. I could do a degree. I can do all those stuff, but it takes me probably 10, 20, 30% more effort than I see the other people at university doing. I genuinely don't think I'm naturally inclined to read large bodies of text. However, identify gaps and opportunities, bring people together, and then maybe obsess over niche topics that excite me, I can really get into that. So either natural or lack of options, and I don't know what it was. Not sorry, I'm rambling on here, but not lack of options in a sense of my life. I am, a privileged young man. I have my parents who come from good backgrounds. I've had options in life, but maybe my academic options, I just didn't feel I had them there because I always compared myself to the other kids who were probably a bit well read. And if I can't get an A, what's the point in competing in that race? But if I can be an entrepreneur and be the best one, that kind of what spurred me on.
Brilliant. So you've got this idea, you've sourced the product, and then how did you fund it? Did you fund it yourself, or did you go out and get external funding?
Well, student loans are a funny old thing. They just every 3 months give you a big lump sum of cash. That was the first part, and that was myself and a couple of other students that got in and funded it. And that funded it for the first few months, and then because it had the funding, because then we won some awards, and awards for nothing, by the way, awards purely for being a young entrepreneur and applying for the award and selling them on the idea that this is a great idea. That's why I won the award. There was no One of my investors eventually said that I was all fur coat and no knickers, which is a bit unfair. But these awards necessarily didn't have much substance to them, but it gave this persona, this perception that we were more successful than we were for sure. So it started off with students funding, myself, my student loan, a couple of my friends, and then we were able to pitch to an investor who believed in me more than the idea. And I think that's one of the biggest lessons I've learned throughout all of business, that the people have 1,000 ideas a day, but the execution and the charisma behind those ideas is worth so much more than a balance sheet and even a good idea.
Right. Okay. Okay. And can I ask how much did this, was it just single person? How much did they back you for?
There was mainly it was one investor, and another chipped in a minority amount as well. But grateful for both investments. It was somewhere around the £300,000 mark. So it was for a 19, 20, 21-year-old maybe by that time. It was a hell of a load of cash. I had no idea. Like my parents, beautiful, wonderful people. They've never seen that amount of cash in their life. I've never seen that amount of cash in my life. It was a lot of money, a scary amount of money for sure.
Okay. Okay. So, right. So we've got a brilliant business idea. We've got the funding. How did the execution go? Obviously, I assume importing from China is not the easiest thing to do, and obviously selling it to festival goers.
And their mums. It wasn't straightforward. It's not easy importing. There's taxes added on top at the end. You've got to have the right codes, right line items. You've got to bring it all over. I made one huge mistake. I invested significantly in stock rather than finding a just-in-time drop shipping method, which wasn't as popular back then, I will say so. But if I was to do it again, and if I was given the same amount of money, I'd probably put 60% of it into marketing rather than 80% of it into stock like I did. I'd have probably flipped it the other way, and gone for it that route. So brought it all into the UK, expected £1 million worth of sales, probably ended up with around £90,000 worth of sales, and didn't plan or prepare for the runway to survive 2 or 3 festival seasons to build the brand up. So ultimately, the business failed. And when I say failed, I mean it ended up owing money to other people. We had to give stock in return for the debt where we could. I had to dismiss people who I'd hired. I'd hired 6 people, my best friend's mum, my dad's friend from the pub. We sound like a right ragtag team, but ultimately they were still friends and people that I knew that were on board with this idea that was going to go to the moon, and ultimately never made it past orbit. So it was a bit of a frustrating time for sure. And for me to live with that failure at 20 years old after being deemed Yorkshire's Young Entrepreneur of the Year, and got an award of Prince Andrew, but I don't really talk about that one anymore. I had all these different things going on, and I was thinking it was all going to work out great, but it was genuinely all fur coat and no knickers, as previously mentioned.
Okay. Okay. Let's just unravel a little bit of that. Why, why did you only get 90 grand's worth of sales and not the £1 million worth of sales that you thought you were going to get?
We invested 80% of value into stock and 20% running costs, a bit of marketing. The marketing efforts were home run marketing efforts where we would sponsor major festivals and pay through the nose for it and pay amounts up front. It was completely inexperienced all the time. I should have offered amounts up front plus shares of revenue. I should have found drop shipping solutions, made less gross profit, and purchased from the UK and brought everything together as and when ordered. We ended up with something like 1,500 kits in the UK or 500, I can't remember, kits in the UK, most of which didn't sell. And it was just, it's exhausting, it's draining, it's embarrassing, it's humiliating. My dad came into the office all one day and saw that we had these 6 people working. We were in these nice offices, and he just said, "What's it all about? What is it you're doing?" Like he didn't, and he was right. He didn't quite. So you're selling tents, but there's no tents in this office. All right, fine, they're in a warehouse. But where's it all happening? Where's it all coming from? And some of our better trading was done at the festival, selling headlamps for triple the price we bought them for because people needed headlamps in that moment rather than the plan we really wanted, which was a heck of a load of kits ordered before the event, turn up, give someone a great service, and then leave. There was all sorts of issues and challenges with the business. If I could do it once more, I'm sorry for rambling on, Phil, but what I would have done is I would have procured the tents from funding social organisations to collect the spare tents from festivals, clean them up, and then resell them in that sense. That would have been much better, environmentally, economically, all sorts of reasons why.
Yeah, yeah. And, it's great what you're saying because, this is where we learn our business lessons. It's from the mistakes. We don't just go,
Yeah,
oh, that was a
yeah.
mistake, full stop. What you're doing and what, the way you're talking through it, we've mentioned this word already, therapeutic. You can see all the things you did wrong and all the learnings you've got from that, and that, hey, it could have been a great business idea. I mean, I think as a parent of kids who've been to festivals, it's a great business idea. It's just executed badly.
And my nephew, he is obsessed. He's 22 now. He remembers he's been there from when he was a kid and saw me go through my challenging times with this business. He said, "You need to start it again." And I'm just thinking, how, I mean, it probably gets some good press, but ultimately, I don't think festivals would welcome me back with open arms, let's say.
Right. Okay. Okay. Is that's down to money's owed to suppliers and things like that?
Not to the festivals, no, due to what happened in the story down the line, which I'm sure we'll get to, but we'll see.
Okay, okay. That's quite a nice lead-in point there. But before we get on to the next chapter, I just want to talk to everybody about the Leeds Business Podcast Fair Deal. The Leeds Business Podcast Fair Deal is part me, part you, the listener. My part of the deal is every week I bring you inspirational, motivational, and fascinating business leaders like Jacob, totally free of charge. Your side of the deal, dear listener, has 2 parts to it. Part number 1, post a review of the show at Apple Podcasts app. You can't do it on the website, you've got to do it on the app. Or post a review at Spotify, or post a review at podchaser.com, or if you're watching on YouTube, give us a wave, Jacob, watching on YouTube. Give us a thumbs up for this review, this episode, and post a review. Part 2 of your part of the fair deal is to recommend this podcast to one person, only one person you think will get benefit from it. There you go. That's the Lead Business Podcast Fair Deal. Fair deal, Jacob?
Sounds like a fair deal to me, Phil.
Okay. So, before my ramble, you gave us a little hint that not only were things not going well with the business, but it got worse. So, do you talk us through the next stage?
It's never easy. Like, it's never. When I come on to podcasts and talk about these things, I said to you before the show that for me it's kind of part therapy to do this. But also I really hope it's an opportunity for parents listening or for people who are in a really challenging time themselves at the moment to understand that asking for help is so much better than maybe trying to deal with all the issues yourselves and thinking, no matter how good you think your answers are, they're probably not if you're in a desperate situation. So for me, I made the regrettable. Every business had a link to the other business, so the sweet selling suggested I was going to be a kid that was going to push the rules regardless. Going to music events because I was able to connect and network with lots of kids. That made a lot of sense to me. That I could bring them all together to concerts because I loved concerts at that age. And then that leads into music festivals, which makes sense. And then it kind of goes full circle because whilst I was at music festivals, drugs were abundantly available. Whilst I was at university, that was the same. And so what? Drugs are everywhere. You can get them. You could walk out on the street probably, no matter which town you're in, and find someone. I don't know. I can't say that for sure, but I reckon they're not the hardest things to come by in modern society. Um, and for me, they just seem so abundantly available whilst I was at university and during the festivals that as the business got those £90,000 worth of sales versus the £1 million worth of sales, and we were going out, and I realised I was in personal debt. For me, the obvious choice was, well, how do I pay this debt off quickly so that I can live debt free and go on to the next enterprise, or God forbid, get better at the next proposed enterprise? And for me, it was a case of drugs are easy to get at a festival, get some drugs and sell them.
Okay.
Not the best idea. Um, there's damage that comes with that. There's damage for predominantly people around me, people that will be taking it, and I have no idea of the consequences that it might have had on others around me. No idea. But then you think about the people within my inner circle who saw what the outcomes of that were, and then myself who was taking the drugs. And it all obviously spirals out very quickly. And I was at this festival. I had drugs on me, and undercover security arrested me. Um, and lo and behold, this was at Leeds Fest. Full circle from where the idea started to where it all ended. And undercover security arrested me, and they took me out of the festival, and I had my ID on me, and I had my lazy camper hoodie on. I don't know what that was about. I have no idea what that was about. Some said I wasn't a very good drug dealer. Other people said it was a way to kind of pull the ripcord on everything and just kind of get everything to fail at once. It was an escape and out, whatever. Personally, I thought I was indestructible. I didn't ask for help. I didn't think I was doing any damage or any wrong. I thought I'd get away with it. I had all the arrogance and all the belief that I can I can do anything I want. They've put me on TV. I can achieve anything. I can achieve it. I could be the best drug dealer ever. And thankfully, I was arrested. Thankfully, I was taken out of the festival. The guy saw my ID, and I'm the spitting image of my mother. And he saw my ID, my name, and my address, and he was like, "You're Jane's son, aren't you?" And he knew my mum. I said, "How do you know my mum?" That was a stupid question. And he said, "Because I've worked with her for 30 years in the police. Mum was a retired police officer. And Mum had her home raided whilst I was in the warm, comfy police cells with a sandwich and a cup of tea. I was crying, I was upset, but the police were incredibly caring for me. They were great with the police in that situation for a scummy drug dealer. And then Dad was having his home raided, but Dad was an ex-drugs investigator. So for one night, for my family, I absolutely flipped their world upside down. Absolutely flipped their world upside down. I was in the police cell, I think, for 21 hours or something. I can't remember. I was coming down off drugs. It was a bloody wake up call. It was terrifying, and I was seeing my whole life unfold with the newspapers, with my parents, with the fear of everything. And I remember just wanting my parents in that moment, no matter what. I just wanted my parents in that moment. And the first people to pick me up from the police station were my parents. And in that moment, probably wasn't that moment, but I look back at that moment now and recognise my privilege. Recognise that my parents even wanted to know me, that I knew them already, that they had a car, that they could come and pick me up from the police station, that they were maybe not in that moment, but ultimately willing to forgive. And I remember the words saying, my mum just said, "Why have you done this to us?" That's tough. That's brutal. And Dad used the words. He said, "You think you're bloody infallible. You think you're indestructible, but nothing can touch you." And it was a. I'm not going to give you a woe me story. I was really comfortable in that, but it was in that moment I recognised the damage I'd done to the people around me. And that was where the lazy camper failed. Ultimately, that was the. It might have failed before with the lack of sales, and it might have failed before with all of that. But I put that nail in the coffin, that last nail in the coffin, and that was it. That was done, which affected people who wanted to keep going with the lazy camper after it. You know, in different forms. No chance.
And do you think subconsciously you almost tried to self destruct, or was it just a financial thing? I need to clear this debt. This is the quickest way of doing it.
I want the debt thing to be the story. I wanted that to be like the logical steps and reason. But if I was to tell you the truth, I believe we're all on this sliding slope towards death or suicide ultimately. And I was just on that way down to the bottom of that through drugs, through not giving a hoot about anyone else, not care. Honestly, I didn't care. I was in this moment where it was like, I was using probably the excuse that it was to pay off the debt. But I remember, and for years after, I was like, this is all I deserve. This is all I deserve. Like, this is where I should be. I don't deserve everything else that I got. I deserve this. Um, I was nothing better than a common drug dealer, in my opinion. And maybe I'd be a good drug dealer at that down the line. I don't know. Um, so I don't think it was for the debt ultimately.
Okay, okay, and okay. So let's go back to the story. You got arrested, you
Mhm.
know, and all the extra layers over that of your parents and there being police officers and all that sort of stuff. What happened after that?
11 months of turning up to courts being full, too busy to see me, pleading guilty at the earliest opportunity, all sorts of different things like that to like the amount of times I had to leave the courtroom not being sentenced. That was murder. Wait, and I'm sorry. I'm not yet again trying to create a war me story. I'm saying how difficult, how anxiety just it was being in the courts, wondering if the newspapers were going to be there or not, who was sitting in the courts, what was going to happen next. Um, Waiting to be sentenced to prison, where I believed I would ultimately be raped and attacked every day. Like, I'm a skinny kid. I was back then, maybe not as much now, but I was this whole idea of like prison is not going to be great for someone like me, given that I've seen The Shawshank Redemption and Orange is the New Black. Um, and it was just waiting to be sentenced. And I think ultimately on the 1st of July, I think I don't want to get my dates wrong, but I think it was like a Wednesday, the 1st of July, 2015, might have been around then. The judge said, I'm going to need a couple of days to think on this. And I was like, oh, crap, I've got to go home yet again, pack my bag again, do all this again. But he saved me from that because he said, I'm going to send you down for a couple of days to Armley Prison. And then the hope kicks in again that maybe in Armley Prison, for those 2 days, the judge is just going to scare me, and then I'll come back up on the Friday and he'll release me, and I've done my 2 days. Um, but that's what the 11 months looked like leading up to that date from August to July the following year.
Right. So I assume life just is on temporary hold for all that period.
Being entrepreneurial, I remember trying to help Dad with his business, which he was wrapping up for retirement, saying, let's redo the website. I wanted to work on a couple of other ideas during that time. I wanted to do more, like see if there's any way to separate myself from the lazy camper, but keep the energy going so that other people can run it, not for me, but without me, but ultimately have something there to do. So those 11 months, and I was also at university, I was finishing my degree. So I was trying to get my dissertation done in time, thinking any month now I could be sentenced, so I need to get that dissertation submitted. So life had enough focus, but I've known people waiting for sentencing for 4 or 5 years now in life beyond all of this. And I can imagine how much it truly affects their life. Like in terms of we want people to be productive citizens, we want people to pay the price. There has to be somewhere in the middle that's a little bit more compromising to get people to get people answers sooner rather than later. So all can move on, perpetrator and victim.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. No, I get that. I get that. So 2 days later, you go back to court. What did the judge say?
So I was taken down to Armley, stayed in Armley for 2 nights. My cellmate was called Mr. Big. You never want to hear that, do you, from a cellmate's name? And great guy, to be honest. Fair enough. Terrible offences, drug dealing to the tune of £8 million, whereas I was arrested with, and I'm not mitigating my offence, by the way, when I say this, I was arrested with £1,500 worth of drugs. He was arrested with £8 million worth of drugs and then convicted a second time for selling during his time in prison. So it gives you an idea of if a petty drug dealer, first time criminal, was put into prison, there's many more opportunities to learn from that experience and go down the wrong route. The judge brought me up after 2 days. Just a side story, when I was taken down the first time, I was in my suit and Richard Branson was mentioned because I'd received a grant off him when I was younger and he'd been supporting with what we were doing. And I remember the prison staff having a good laugh, saying, "Oh, this kid knows Richard Branson. There you go." And it was funny to them, and to me, I was terrified in that moment, and I needed them to be my friends or to be friendly or to be nice. And they gave me some clothes and said, "You're going to want to change out of your suit because you'll stick out like a sore thumb in prison, especially a kid like you." And they gave me the clothes, and I stood there with them, waiting to be shown to a changing room or something. And they were like, "Well, go on then." And I just had to get changed in reception. And I'm not saying it yet again, a whoa me story. I'm saying it more to like what I was expecting, or how prepared I was. I thought I was prepared with my lists, with my items, my research online. Nothing prepares you for it, no matter where you come from, and which prison you end up in. It's all different. Judge brought me up after 2 days and said, "I've looked through the guidance, which could be anything from a suspended sentence to potentially 9 years in prison for a leading role selling Class A drugs." I was arrested with MDMA and weed in my own right, as someone doing it off my own back. I wasn't forced. I wasn't coerced. I wasn't, it was. I don't ever want it to be misconstrued that I'd made a mistake. I'd made a choice, and it was a terrible choice. It was a wrong choice, but I didn't do it by accident. It was something that I actively chose to do, and I'll regret it until I know I'll regret it till my last day. But I'm hoping I can make something good of it. But Judge brought me up and said, "I tried to avoid a prison sentence, but I cannot." He said, "You have had all the trappings of a successful person." He mentioned something else about, people around you, effect it's had on them. Could have asked for help. He was Judges are very good judges of character. That's their job. They're very good. They're good at balancing things up. They're good at seeing reason. And yes, he sentenced me to what would be 28 months. Now that's not 28 months in prison, but it's potentially up to 14 months in prison and 14 months in the community. And if you have good behaviour, good place to go, if you're privileged, you get less than the 14 months. So I even got off lighter than that, I'd say, where I got 9.5 months in prison, 4.5 months on tag, and 14 months, and that on tag in the community, in my home, on a little ankle bracelet. And then 14 months in still in home, but without the tag, reporting to a probation officer every month. I don't know whether it was enough. I don't know whether it was too little, too much. I got the sentence I got, and I served every day in the idea that I deserve that. I deserve to be here. The judges thought it through. Some people might have said that you deserve more for even considering selling drugs, right through to it might have been a lot for the amount you had on you. But for me, it was a case of I'll serve that sentence. I'll finish my rehabilitation period, and then I'll continue to live in service from that point to find different ways to not only repay that debt, but hopefully recognize that a lot of the people I met inside deserve another chance at life, and I'd want to ensure that they get that.
Yeah. I mean, how did it feel when he said that, when he sent you down?
Mum cried, heard that. I looked to my family. It was just a number at the time. And then I have to walk down lots of spirally steps, and I was working out if I get a tag, what my release date would be. Now, most guys don't even know that they could get a tag 4 months before, 4.5 months. I think it's even longer now. For me, it was mathematical in that moment. It was, you're going to be sentenced. You've got to accept whatever it is. You need to focus more on preparing yourself for any sentence, whether it's 1 day or 9 years. If he'd have sentenced me to 24 months, which is 4 months less than what he gave me, it could have been a suspended sentence and could have resulted not in prison. At that moment, I knew I was going to prison. And having 2 days in prison, I don't know. I was always lucky. I was always a jammy git, as some people would say, and I always thought maybe I think there was something in the back of my mind that maybe I'd get away with it. But I genuinely think the luckiest thing that happened to me was going to prison and seeing that different side of life. I was a snobby ass university student who didn't really want to, who would look down at his nose at people, who would have all that. And then the first day in prison, I was sitting next to a person rattling, coming off heroin after they'd just been, did it just before they went into the courts, knowing that full well they'd be going to prison that night. Um, we need to see what the other side of the fence looks like as a society. We need to empathize with that. And for me, it was the biggest wake up call of my life. That I was probably one of the only few people in that prison who was there out of a choice rather than desperation.
Right. And how was prison for a white middle class kid like you?
Mm. Son of two police officers, that's the big one. That's the huge one. Yeah, that's the big deal. I might as well have been put on a sex offenders wing and I was offered to. And I said no. I'd rather stay amongst the general population, and nothing to do with people who, in that situation commit those offences. For me, it was very much about, I knew once I was I'd have less options being put on a vulnerable wing. Judges and police officers and people with sexual offences get put on the vulnerable wing. I wasn't necessarily that. I certainly didn't follow in the same footsteps as my parents, so maybe I stood a chance of surviving amongst the population. Mr. Big vouched for me to other prisoners. I don't think I was his. I don't know if I can swear on this podcast, so I don't want to use inappropriate language. But I don't think I was going to be holding his pocket walking around the courtyard necessarily. But he was. He obviously wasn't the fondest of the police, but he said to the other prisoners, he said, "This kid's all right. Like he's not an issue. He's not a problem. He's a smart kid. Let's work with, let's not give him any grief." And that was great. And the newspapers posted son of two police officers goes to prison, stuff like that. That got out on the wing. Not great. Um, I was attacked twice during my time in prison as a result of being the son of two police officers. I don't talk about it too much. I think I'm over it, but it was still traumatic regardless. What I found more traumatic and probably was that I enjoyed the response that other prisoners gave to the people who attacked me. So I was attacked, and other prisoners went and devastated those two individuals who attacked me. They absolutely, because they said Jacob's not someone that you need to attack, cause problems for, this, that, the other. So they would go into their cell and absolutely, as I say, destroyed those two in a way that was, for me in that moment, I was a bit happy, going, I know I'm fine in this prison now. I know I'm going to be okay. And then I look back on those two individuals and how prison life treated them and how life will treat them beyond release. It's not going to get better for those guys if they don't have interventions or help. Like, they're not in a situation. So yeah, prison for me was fine generally. It was mundane, but I also found a lot of purpose in my life in that, and wanted to stop pursuing money and start pursuing impact, and that's something that was really good for me. And I had two jobs in prison. My first job was sewing together 200 pairs of boxer shorts every day. So I got really good with the overlocking machine. I learned a new skill. Why not? And then after 2 months, 3 months, my next job was being a peer mentor, someone who's in that prison supporting other prisoners. I became a Samaritan's listener for suicidal prisoners. We could all listen more. I talk too much. We've got two ears and one mouth. We need to remember to listen twice as much as we talk. And being a listener, being a Samaritan was really helpful. Being a peer mentor to help people prepare for forms on release, working for the St. Giles Trust, a huge honour. You can live a life in service, you'll be content for the rest of your life. It's phenomenal. So for me, I actually was able to disguise this horrible sentence as something purposeful.
I know you've mentioned it already, but it's very Shawshank Redemption, isn't it?
There wasn't the Three Sisters. You don't get raped in prison.
I'm thinking more Andy Dufresne than the rest of it.
All right, okay. Like, for me, I can't separate the two from the other. There was times in the prison where I was mistaken for a staff member. I had jeans, a jumper on. I was polite. I well spoken. This, that, the other, and it's strange for me to talk about. But there were times where another staff member would go, "Shall I leave this gate open for you, sir?" And I'm like, "No, it's fine. You crack on. Don't worry about it." Because I don't know how much of it. I fantasized a lot that I bet I could walk out of here if I tried, and maybe that's what kept me saying that it was almost a choice to be there. My skills were used. I was able to help people with business plans or help people plan their CVs or housing on release, complete forms. I loved that. I loved doing that, and I have no idea about my individual kind of involvement in other people's kind of life beyond prison. But I really hope that just by filling those forms out right or knowing a few tricks to get them prioritized on a top of the housing ladder or stuff like that when they were going to go out for social things like that, I hope made a difference. So maybe it is a bit Andy Dufresne, but I think in any form of life, you make yourself useful to other people, you'll survive any situation, whether it's prison, a desert island, or a toxic corporate culture workplace, which I'd probably advise getting out of and switching if you're in one already. But just being useful, living in service for me is it's something I enjoy. It's something that gives me purpose.
And that purpose took you to the next stage, which is Offploy. So do you want to tell all our listeners all about that?
Offploy is an organisation that takes people at risk of offending, and I'd like to circle back to that, and just helps them access greater opportunities in life. It helps people maximise their life's potential. I could phrase it another way and say it's for people who are socially excluded, getting them back into work, getting them in secure housing, getting the kids back in their life. I can phrase it another way and say specifically it's homeless people, young people, mental health issues, people who've never seen the inside of a police cell or been arrested by the police, but people who are at risk of offending. So Offploy is a mentoring service. It's been phenomenally successful over the last 7.5 years now. Goodness me. We serve people from Newcastle to Torquay. We run service in London, Midlands, all the way around the country. We've got a team of 30, 70% who have been to the prison system, been through it themselves. And we help individuals probably around, I think we get about 3,000 referrals a year, and around 900 people go through our service every year to, might be to get a job, might be to get back in a stable accommodation from sleeping on the streets or in the car. It might be a family in debt that needs help managing their finances better. We're taking any flashpoints where crime happens and trying to get there before that leg breaks rather than dealing with a broken leg. We also support people who are in prison or have been to prison because, on average, a person with a criminal conviction is 30% likely to reoffend within 12 months. So 30.9, I think the percentage is. So let's say 31. And if they're going to be my neighbour, I want them free from crime. I want them working. I want them contributing to society. I want my friends, family, kids safe from crimes of desperation and poverty. And that's Offploy.
Right. Okay. And do you work direct with employers to get, these ex-prisoners jobs, or do you just advise them, or how much are you part of that connection between the two?
I will work with people with convictions, socially, I'll say people at risk of offending as a group, and I will work with employers. I like passing ships in the night. We're not a brokerage service. So we teach the people with convictions, we teach both sides how to fish ultimately. So we teach people with convictions how to find jobs, when to disclose, if to disclose, what happens if they get rejected, how to deal with rejection, how to get back up on that ladder. It's not comfortable. It is not comfortable applying, no matter who you are. I was released from prison and it took me 6 weeks to start Offploy, but in that time I was frantically applying for jobs, interviews, rejections, horrible situation, especially when you assume you're going to be rejected. You go into interviews with hope most of the time, like, oh, if I don't get it, it's fine, but there's a little bit of hope there. When you've got a conviction, you go in there thinking they're probably going to reject me. So you respond and you interview in a way that says I'll probably get rejected, so I best not give it. Yeah, I best not get my own. Anyway, so supporting people with convictions, we teach them how to fish. Any job, better job, career, dream job. A, B, C, D. Any job, better job, career, dream job. A, B, C, D. Let's get them any job. Let's help them understand which employers will ask, which employers have to ask, which ones won't ask. Great. On the other side, employers. Oh my God, imagine hiring a person with a criminal conviction. When I picture people with convictions, I still picture prisoners. I still picture Shawshank Redemption. The MOJ the gov.uk released only 2 weeks ago, or last week, 1 in 4 people in the workforce has a prior criminal offence. 1 in 4. When we are in a post-Brexit, post-pandemic economy with hundreds of thousands of vacancies available, we cannot avoid hiring people with convictions, and we probably already are. Phil, it's 1 in 3 adult males between the ages of 18 and 52. I don't want to speculate, but I assume we're both within that window. So that's 2 of us here. We bring a third person in, and 1 in 3 of us probably has a conviction. Now, I know we know the answer there, but I'm saying that it's when we think about people with convictions, I think we picture murderers, terrorists, arsonists, criminals in prison and all that stuff. 54% for driving related offences. So when we think about people with criminal convictions, only 8% get sentenced to prison every year. 92% of people get community orders. So the other side is advising employers, whether you're a Leeds business or a PLC, we work with those employers from getting the culture right, recruitment processes, asking the dreaded question, rejecting people when they've got a conviction and we can't actually hire them, right through to measuring your impact and using it to profit your business. You know, when we hire, sorry if I'm going on here too much, but when we hire someone with a conviction, for society saves, after 6 months of employment, £23,119. One person, 6 months of employment, 23 grand saved. Now, when businesses are applying for business from the government and they have to tick a social value box and say how much social value they're going to bring to society, hiring people with convictions is one of the most profitable things you can do. So for us, it's a good business case and a great social case.
Right. I totally get that. And as a former employer of staff, being totally honest, if I've got a pile of 20 CVs and one of the people in there has got a conviction, you go, well, okay, that makes it easy. It's down to 19. It's far too easy for employers to go, right, no. And how do we change that? How do we, there's a lot of people listening to this who are employers and
yeah,
may well have come across this situation or will come across this situation.
Mm-hmm.
How do you change their mindset?
I'll first of all start by saying it's not illegal to discriminate against people with convictions. It's illegal to discriminate against people whose convictions have been spent, and they shouldn't be disclosing and you shouldn't be asking in most situations. And spent is just a fancy word for saying a certain amount of time has passed where it will no longer appear on a basic DBS check. It will always appear on a standard. It will always appear on an enhanced, apart from some filtered convictions, which I'm not going to go into on this call. So how do you talk to employers about that? Well, because they can do it legally. They can discriminate legally. It's not a protected characteristic. I don't think, and I say this with love, that employers will have much of a choice soon enough. And it's the spoils of hiring this fit, able, willing, determined, ready, skilled workforce are going to go to the employers who act first. Brexit's happened. The pandemic's happened. You are struggling to recruit as it is. There are piles, hundreds of thousands of people with convictions who will take an opportunity that's not necessarily gutting fish, and there's nothing wrong with gutting fish. It is a great job for a career progression for people, but that's where people think they're going to go. They're going to go work in muddy boot zones and gutting fish, when I've got chartered accountants that were convicted of entirely unrelated offences that are saying, well, maybe I could take an admin job and all this. And by the way, I'm not turning my nose up at this. I'm saying that when I'm looking for a finance manager for my organisation, I'm going to go find the chartered accountant with the conviction that will join me at 20 grand below the market average because they want to prove themselves. So how do we get people doing it? I think employers, the first thing in their head will be, well, I don't want to do it. Maybe. And they'll say, actually, no, I'd be willing to give someone a chance because my nephew went to prison once, or I know a guy down the street that went to prison and he wasn't that bad of a guy. And we know not to discriminate in this culture now, thank goodness. And then they'll say, well, how do I do it? Where do I start? I'm scared of doing it for 2 different reasons. Reputational risk, because they might they might stab one of my staff, they might nick my stock, I might be Googled alongside them. So-and-so now works at this organisation. That's not an issue. 86% of employers say they benefit from greater reputation when it comes to hiring people with convictions. That's phenomenal. And then the other side of that is, well, what if I get it wrong? And what if I commit an offence in hiring this person? Or what if I don't have the right insurance in place? Or what if I ask a question wrong and I insult or discriminate against the person and all that stuff? Um, there's all sorts of free advice lines. There's all sorts of free support in doing that. Interestingly, there's very few things you can get wrong because they're not a protected characteristic. We are not a protected characteristic, people with convictions. You might ask questions, you might fumble, it might get a bit awkward when you're trying to understand what to ask and when to ask, and it might be a bit, ultimately, if your intentions are pure and you're wanting to give people that second chance, that other chance, then I'd say just give it a go, or work with organisations like us. Not trying to plug us there too much, but I am on a podcast, so why not? That we can be there for organisations to answer those questions, to help you with your policies, processes, stuff like that. So my advice to employers is give it a go. Give it a go. You can get very little wrong, I promise. Famous last legal words, right? Don't hold me legally responsible for that, but you can get very little wrong, asterisks.
Brilliant, brilliant. And I was going to ask you to do a how-to, as all our guests do on this podcast. So that's pretty much was how to hire an ex-convict.
I think so. I think you've got to recognise that 1 in 4 people in the workforce has a conviction. You need a plan on how you're going to deal with people with convictions, applying, and colleagues who disclose after they've applied, and colleagues who get criminal convictions when they already work for you. There needs to be a bit of a plan there, and even if it's back of a napkin or a 1-page policy, just get something started. We're working with the Chartered Institute of Personnel Development, CIPD. I don't want to get it wrong. To help them with some guidance that's coming out in the next week or so as well. So that's a really great starting point to how to hire people with criminal convictions in a fair and safe manner.
Brilliant, brilliant.
Give it a go. That's the how-to is give it a go.
I think one of the things you said there, which I think employers should consider, is you can get very good value for money because these people are desperate to get back into society and back into a proper job, and one assumes you're going to get a harder worker because they're desperate to prove themselves as well.
Absolutely. I mean, the cases are phenomenal. That you look at retention after 12 months of, I think it's the Timson's group, and 92% of people are still with them after 12 months. Not only are employers struggling to hire people, they're struggling to keep people. Now, it's not just about desperation, but it's also about gratefulness, loyalty from people with convictions. When you've written yourself off and someone else hasn't written you off, can you imagine what effect that has on you? That's huge. That's huge. There's a period with which after someone is sentenced by a judge, and it's really complex, but everyone has an amount of time with which they must talk about their offence. Unfortunately, most people don't know how long that time is, and we're bringing out a calculator to work it out for people. They have to keep disclosing that offence for a number of years, and the government's just changed it. They've just allowed the option for hundreds of thousands of people to now one day not talk about their offence. Before, they had to talk about it for the rest of their life. Now, one day it will be behind them. That period is the reason why employers will benefit from hiring people with convictions. They could hire someone with 4 years left with which they have to disclose. And the chances are that if you give them a great job and a great opportunity, they'll fight to stay with you for those next 4 years as a minimum. Not to mention the loyalty and skills and reasons to stay that will build up over that time. But they're not looking over their shoulder after the 6-month probation period already. These guys are thinking, right, I've got 4 years. No one is going to ask me about my conviction for the next 4 years if I stay with this job now, who already knows about my offence, who's already given me that chance. I'm going to stay here. We need to be considering this cohort, especially when it's 1 in 4 of the workforce.
And that's a brilliant business case for doing so. It really is. It really is. Jacob, it's been absolutely brilliant. One last question for you, and I ask all our guests this. Who are you going to give a shout out to for another Leeds business?
My goodness, I could not shout out anyone else other than this one organisation. If you look at the website Designed by Ink, and I think it's .co.uk. Look at Offploy's website, look at our brand, look at their branding. They are this beautiful young couple from somewhere around the Greater Leeds area. And I don't hire them for that reason, but their design work is beautiful. They do all our cards. They've done my wedding invites recently. They do all our website. They do all our marketing materials. They understand this whole level of, you won't tell them what you need. You'll tell them what you need, but you won't tell them how to do it. That's the point. So you'll say, I need a flyer that does this. I need to get this point across. And here's some text. Fine. Don't go in and tell them what colours and shapes you want on it. They're so much better than you, I promise. They're so much better than what you know. So this is designed by Ink. It's Matt and Nicole. Amazing couple, amazing design work. I couldn't recommend them more. And I wish them all the best with their work, because they've been with us for, gosh, most of our 7 years now. They've done the University of Huddersfield. They've done some big clients. They've done some good stuff. And they'll give you that personal service. So I like them a lot.
Fantastic. There will be a link to them down in the show notes once this goes live, as there will to Offploy and Jacob. Jacob's been absolutely amazing. Thank you very, very much indeed.
I'm really grateful for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode. I hope you found it interesting, inspiring, and of use. To make sure you don't miss out on any future episodes, please subscribe to the show. Go on, do it now. Do it now before you go off and do something else. Thank you. Much appreciated. Oh, and don't forget our fair deal. See you next week.